Hey guys, Matthew here. In today's video, we're basically going to go over the part 1 of the development manifesto, which is going to be Flask and Ailments. Now, I'm not going to take the time to read over this entire thing. If you're interested, I highly recommend you read it. There's some interesting stuff in there, but I'm going to go over what I consider to be the main points, the ones that affect the most players, and of course the ones that have any sort of real effects, because a lot of this stuff is kind of just words for words. Now, the link for this manifesto part 1 is going to be in the description. There's going to be a video tomorrow for part 2 and the next day for part 3, because there's 3 parts to the manifesto of this league, including a apparently 14,000+ word patch notes that we are waiting for. So it's going to be a big one. Now, without further ado, let's jump into the main things to note, because I want to talk about essentially the changes, but also what effect these changes have, because sometimes some very minor changes can have some rippling effects, which can change a whole lot. So first thing, Purity of Elements now grants you and nearby allies are immune to all elemental ailments. This is not something that is too game breaking for most players. It does, however, mean, and especially because it has more all res than it used to have, the reservation is 50%. It means that chances are for group play, this is going to be obviously a no-brainer. It means that your entire group is going to be immune to ailments, which means Aura bots are going to love this. That being said, I believe Aura bots already ran Purity of Elements. In terms of solo play, in terms of stuff like that, you as a player, are you going to start using this aura all of a sudden? Probably not, right? That's probably not something that you're going to be doing. So it's mostly for party play as a quality of life option. Not a big deal. That being said, it may very well be used for leveling, right? Being immune to ailments and having a ton of resistance may be something that people start looking into. Sacrificing a little bit of damage, like a hatred aura, and then instead grab this, and then you're immune to all ailments, and not only that, you get a ton of resistance, which should cap you out, or just about anywhere outside of the, outside of maps, which can make leveling portion of the game much smoother if you're not upgrading your gear very often. Pretty cool stuff. Otherwise, Steelskin buff now grants you are immune to bleeding. Now, this is not going to be a big deal again, because most builds can't have permanent uptime on Steelskin. Therefore, it's a nice little quality of life. Well, you have it, you have it. It does mean that Steelskin is probably going to become a little bit more used than what it is right now. Steelskin is definitely one that most people don't use because the shield is just not really worth it compared to a high armor build that would use something like, for example, Molten Shell, or like a build that would use even Arcane Cloak, stuff like that. Steelskin is definitely on the back burner. Even Immortal Call being much more popular, but that might just bring it back into action. I know that this is a buff for me because my builds have very low life, therefore Steelskin is a massive amount of EHP. Utility Flasks now have modifiers that grant immunity to the elements during Flask effect, but lessens the duration of the Flask. Essentially what this means is that they're reverting the nerf that they made last league, but instead of just completely reverting it, they're reverting it, but they're slightly nerfing it as well. Because we are getting back immunity during ailments, right? During the entire Flask, meaning that if you have a Flask that is an enduring, let's say, Flask Warding or something, during that Flask, you are completely immune to curses. But now the downside is that whenever you get that, it will lessen the duration of the Flask. Is it a big deal? Not really. I think it's actually really good that they're giving us back so that you don't have to play reactively. You can actually play proactively when you're mapping in order not to get things like, curses on you, frozen, ignited, stuff like that. You'll be able to take care of that proactively, which is huge. All right, now this is definitely one of my favorite change. Soul of Brine King, upgraded Soul of Brine King grants cannot be frozen instead of you cannot be frozen if you've been frozen recently. This is huge. This was already one of my go-to on all my builds because, again, I play very low life builds, and because builds that have a small amount of life get stunned easily, Brine King makes it so you cannot get permanently stunned, right? You can't get stun locked. You can get stunned once, and then you can't get stunned again for 4 seconds, meaning it's really good. Now, not only that, I get to never be frozen. Huge quality of life upgrade when you are mapping. Huge quality of life when you are bossing, right? You won't require that Flask for cannot be frozen. Very nice. I love this change. Soul of Yugol no longer grants 50% chance to reflect. Instead, it grants you and your minions take 50% reflected damage. Now, this is the big one, right? So instead of no longer grants 50% chance to reflect chill and freezes, which was completely useless, now it has 50% you and your minions take 50% reduced reflected damage, and this is applied to both elemental and physical instead of 25%. Now, I don't think that this is going to change anything in the meta because the remaining 50%, yeah, now it's actually going to be an option to just get it on a ring because I believe rings can go upwards of 50%, which means you can get completely reflect immune both physical and elemental with a single ring slot or one affix on a ring. But you know, if you do that, technically it's no better than if you were just using that unique ring that we've all been using in order to get reflect immune for things like Adziri. That being said, it's nice to have options now and not just being stuck to going with that unique ring, which I just can't remember the name of at the moment. Upgraded Soul of Vugal now grants 30% reduced effective curses instead of 20%. Now, this is one that is actually a big deal. On paper, it doesn't sound huge, right? 10% less reduced effective curses. But paired with something else that I'll talk about in a minute, it's pretty huge. Chance to avoid elemental ailments crafting bench option now grants up to 25% instead of 18%. Basically, they reverted the nerf. This is huge, especially with the amount of avoid ailments that is now going to be available everywhere with some of the changes that they're making. Absolutely massive. You're going to be able to get, let's say, 2 crafts of 25% and then 50% elsewhere, and then boom, you're completely ailment immune. So pretty much every single build in the game is going to be capable of being ailment immune with a small bit of investment right now. So it's going to be absolutely awesome. Looking forward to that. I hate ailments. I mean, we all do. All right, rings 20 to 25% reduced effective curses on you. So essentially, you are now being able to craft this, right? You can craft up to 25% reduced effective curses on you, which you could not do on rings before, so this is completely new, and this means that you can move away from things like Kikazaru for more expensive builds, but you don't have to go something like Verity's Veil or Adziri's Reflection on to get, immunity to those curses. So that is a pretty big deal, the fact that it opens up ring slots. All right, Shield, the tier 1 chance to avoid ailments. It can now grant up to 35%. So I think that was just an upgrade from like 25% or something. I can't quite remember. But 35% is massive on a shield, especially because shields don't have very many good suffixes, right? A lot of good prefixes on shields, but the only real suffixes are either resistances, attributes, or things like, attributes and quality, right? Or, of course, life on block or ES on block, but that's about it. So there's always been kind of this open suffix on shields that nobody there's never anything really good to put there. Now you can smack on that 35% ailment immunity, and that is a massive buff to survivability if you can get upwards of that 100%. The chance to avoid all ailment status ailment modifier on Shaper boots scales up to 35, previously 25. That's just a revert to the nerf. It was 35 before they nerfed it. The reduced curse effect modifier on Crusader and Shaper rings now scales up to 40%. So that's another huge one because, again, moving away from Kikazaru for those endgame builds that like to self-curse, mostly thinking of Totems here, using, what's it called? Soul Mantle, right? Being able to use other things than just Kikazaru or the shield or the helmet. Really, really cool. Kikazaru, however, was buffed a lot. The Kikazaru ring now grants 60% reduced effective curses, and previously it was 20%. Now, this is a huge change because paired with that 30% that I was talking about earlier, right? This means that you can basically get that 30% and then this 60% from Kikazaru from a single ring slot, and then just one node of 10% on the tree, and you are completely immune to curses. And that means that totem builds are probably going to be very, very popular this league. Because, man, that's nice. Not having to give up both your ring slots, not having to give up a bunch of points on the tree, not having to give up a helmet slot or a shield slot, not having to give up any of that, just one ring slot at a couple points to be completely curse immune, and then you can also get ailment immune. That is really, really big. Now, there is a bit of a downside to that, however, and that's what I was talking about, rippling effects. And because this change makes it so it becomes very easy to get ailment immune on those builds that use Kikazaru, which is the builds that even care about getting curse immune, not ailment immune, it might mean that the price of the helmet, right, I'm talking about Verity's Veil from Maven, is going to be completely obsolete again. It used to be really, really cheap. It became really expensive this league because of the changes to curses. And now it might just go right back to being completely cheap, and it kind of sucks because that's really the only drop from Maven outside of her Maven's Orb that have any real value in a League Start scenario. Which means that they're taking one of the most endgame bosses currently available, which is Maven, and they're basically saying, there's not a single drop in there that's going to have any sort of real value. There is the red belt, I can't remember the name of right now off the top of my head, but that's only a couple exalts. So for a super endgame belt, super endgame boss like Maven to basically have nothing in her drop pool that's valuable other than orbs, which nobody care for in a League Start scenario, I'm talking like the first week or so, it's just a bit annoying for people who like to kill bosses, right? This might have a pretty rough effect on the boss killing potential for profit, but of course we'll have to wait and see when the actual patch notes drops. But that's the first thing I thought about when I heard about this. I was like, oh man, like boss killing might just take a huge slap to the face, especially if they are changing the aura bots. Now this is something we'll know about in a couple days, so I'll be talking about this again. But if they change aura bots to where, you can't stack as many auras, or you can't, have as many auras affecting party members, or whatever they decide to do with that, there's a good chance that Nebulous is also going to drop in price because it might not be the go-to anymore if you can't reach that 90 res. If that happens, that means that Cortex also just lost a big reason why people farm it in a League Start scenario. It's not for the Bottled Faith, it's for the Nebulous because it's a lot more consistent. If that's no longer valuable, that also has a rippling effect on farming the Feared, because at that point, Maven's no longer really worth farming, so you don't really care about getting their Maven's Writs, but you also don't really care about getting, Nebulous, which is one of the super common drops from there. So, that's why I was talking about rippling effects. Now, of course, this is not going to affect most people. This is mostly for those 1%ers who want to rush to the end game. But for those people, right, like, kind of like what I enjoy to do, rushing to the bosses as fast as possible, this really might be a huge nerf to us. And that does mean that looking at some different strategies might be the way to go. Of course, we're going to have to wait and see. All right, Flask. Like before, permanent immunity with high clear speed. Remember what I said? You'll be able to get immune to bleed, frozen, freeze, whatever, during Flask effect. Now, this will have reduced duration, which means that you're going to need a high clear speed build to have permanent uptime. Flask in general are going to last longer, however, between 40 and 50% longer, so it kind of comes out and cancels out this requirement of a high clear speed build because they last longer, so in the end it's kind of the same thing. Flask have new high tier Flask mods, like better mods, so like Adrenaline, for example, is going back to 14% instead of the nerfed 6% that we have currently, which is like completely useless. So that's cool to know that, some of the mods are actually going to be pretty good now, that were kind of just left in the dust. It also means that crafting high tier flasks, which means that dropping high tier flask or high item level flask in maps might actually have value now, right? Flasks are something nobody looks for on a filter, but now if you need flasks to be of high item level to get the high eye level mods, that does mean that there is going to be value in picking up those high eye level flasks and then crafting them to maybe sell them. All right, Flask Enkindling Orbs. Enkindling Orbs are getting a pretty big buff. Effect is the main one, right? That people care about. It goes up to 70% instead of 50%. So I made a video about of using a Enkindling Orb Diamond Flask because it takes the 50% and then you get times 1.5 essentially from the 50% effect. Now this is going to be even stronger now because it's a 70% effect. Not to mention that you can also still have the crafted of the order for an extra 60%. So instead of your flask renting you, I think it was like 150% crit, it's not going to be like 170. So it's going to be a pretty nice little buff again to your crit chance if you're struggling to get crit on your build. And then the last thing that I think really has a big effect is the Ranger area is now going to have mana gained on hit with attacks if you use the mana flask in the past 10 seconds. And this is pretty huge because a lot of attack builds, right, especially bow builds, early before they have a lot of investment and stuff, struggle with mana, right? You need to have these, you need to do a lot in order to be able to sustain your mana. And now getting some mana on hits, if you used a mana flask in the past 10 seconds, well, you were already using a mana flask more than likely, but now you're going to get that mana on hits. for 10 seconds, which is really good for bossing, right? You're no longer gonna have to portal out of your map to come back in to kill that map boss that you just can't quite kill, and you're stuck throwing regular basic arrows at in order to get flash charges. Now you're actually going to get some mana gained on hits with every single attack for 10 full seconds per charge, right? Most mana flasks have anywhere between 4 and 6 charges or something like that, so that's like a whole minute that you can just sit there and getting mana on hit, which means your uptime on damage is going to be a lot more consistent, and it's going to feel a lot better. Now, hopefully it's not gated behind a wheel or something where you have to spend a bunch of points to get it, but, you know, that's definitely going to be worth picking up for those bow builds especially, or any sort of attack builds, but especially attack bow builds. Those tend to really struggle with mana. Thinking of even things like Toxic Rain, for example. Struggles with mana a lot. So yeah, that's pretty much a TLDR of the important things from the manifesto, and of course, a little bit of the, I guess you could say, the rippling effect of some of these changes. The big one, in my opinion, is really this one here. Cannot be frozen. He's huge for Soul of Brine King. And then, of course, what I was mentioning earlier about the potential for reduced effective curses on you to really drop in value because it's available in so many places. Therefore, diluting by far the value of things like Azir's Reflection or, of course, Verity's Veil from Maven. So anyways, hopefully you like this little recap. There's going to be another one tomorrow for the part 2. Before I go, as always, I want to say a massive thank you to my supporters. Kat, Alex, Brandon, Nate, the other Alex, Flame Scorpion, Neroth, Grimoire, the Grey Master, Johnny, Thomas, Mass, Reese, Tim, Axel, Road to Millions, Atticus, Scots, Stan, Zarashi, welcome back, Wolverine, Ronald, Kevin, the third Alex, Bitizen, and Mercury, as well as, of course, anybody else who supported me in the past and anybody else who wishes to remain anonymous. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.